Welcome to the Balancing Act podcast with Singer Liwak, the podcast where we explore how the ever-changing business landscape and new opportunities shape today's decisions. In this episode, we're exploring AI and cybersecurity, including recent updates from Anthropic that highlight how quickly AI capabilities are advancing and what that means for cyber defense. Let's get started.
Greetings, and thank you very much for joining us today for another Singer Liwak podcast. I'll welcome you. I'm Bob Green. I'm the lead partner for Singer Liwak's SL Business Informatics Practice Area. I'm a CPA and former CFO, and I've also been leading a technology practice here at Singer for the last roughly 20 years. One of our practice areas within SL Business Informatics is cybersecurity, and we wanted to make sure that we brought some interesting thought leadership to you from people who are literally doing the work daily, both on a defensive measure and also advisory measure for our clients. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers today who are spending a lot of their days, frankly, helping clients on the cybersecurity side of things, both being defensive as well as very good about advising on an ongoing basis, so people continue to stay defensively protected. These are our two leaders, Eric Rockwell and Jeff Gulick. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today. Eric, why don't you start, give them a little background on yourself, and then Jeff, you can follow.
Eric Rockwell, cyber lead with SL Business Informatics, CISSP, and vCISO. It's Virtual Chief Information Security Officer. And my role is to help chair information security steering committees, help senior leadership understand areas of risk, who's attacking them, where they're attacking them from, what's under attack, and make decisions about accepting risks or mitigating the risks. And if a risk is accepted, making sure that senior leadership documents that correctly so that it is clearly understood who accepted the risk. And if they don't want to accept the risk, working with the team to mitigate the risk so the probability and the impact are both lower.
I'm Jeff Gulick. I am a CISSP. I've been working in cybersecurity for the past 25 years in various roles. Before it was really even a thing, I was formerly an IT director with Dover Corporation for a number of years, and am now working with Singer Liwak as a senior analyst and consultant. I also help to oversee the technical team that manages the cybersecurity programs. My focus is really on all of the technical tools and all of the things that we use to identify the bad guy and help protect the clients from them.
And how timely for today, Jeff, right? So
sure is.
Thank you for that. And we do appreciate that Jeff doesn't sleep at night at all because he's up taking care of these things. But AI can help you, right? But today, the reason for today, and thank you again for tuning in, we'll make this a fairly efficient podcast so we don't keep you too long. But in the big picture, we're trying to think about how is artificial intelligence changing the balance of power between cybersecurity defenders and the threat actors that we're trying to defend our clients against. And, without really spending a lot more time, we all know that there is a huge influx and a significant increase in the amount of intrusions that are occurring that get past defense that isn't particularly well thought out. And the way that our group tends to focus on deploying cybersecurity is to really focus, as Eric said, on the things that are riskiest and the most of concern to the clients we have and the systems that they operate, because nothing is ironclad, but we do try and make sure that we address the things that matter. And at the same time, the kind of tool sets that Jeff was describing need to have AI capabilities built in and increasingly built in, because it's only that, the other side is getting smarter every day and much more effective at the same tools. So without a whole lot more to add to that, I was going to jump in for you guys. Let's talk about the offensive use of AI in the cyber world. So how are, cyber criminals and nation state actors, and essentially we call them threat actors as well, using AI to make attacks more sophisticated, more scalable, and even more difficult to detect? I know that's the world we live in.
You're spot on, Bob. Essentially right now, AI is primarily used to scale and refine attacks, and it's doing that in a number of ways. AI-driven phishing, deepfake attacks, automated reconnaissance, and AI-assisted malware. So before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about you were talking about how they're using it to create code, right? So they're using it to create adaptive code to insert malware, adapt that code so that it can get around inside of the environment and move laterally much easier and getting through things that would normally catch it.
Yeah. So in other words, it's getting more and more clever because it has no time frame to worry about. It's going to keep trying until it busts through. Is that the concept, Jeff?
Yeah, basically. Yep, exactly.
So you mentioned something earlier in that you mentioned deep fake attacks and that sort of thing. So help a little bit on maybe what that really means and how our clients might be most concerned about those sorts of things and other malicious behavior that AI is now accelerating the risk about.
Yeah, so deep fake attacks are really where threat actors are starting to leverage things like voice cloning to actually do a phone call. Like they will intercept a voice conversation or capture some video or something of a CEO or a senior leader in a video demonstration or something like that. They'll take that audio and use that to create a clone of someone calling up a finance person and say, "Hey, by the way, I really need you to transfer, $100,000 to this bank account. It's got to be done today."
So that just screams for controls. I know, Eric, you tend to be a very heavy control technician with us. I've seen you at work. Do you want to share a little bit about some of the ways that people can be particularly effective at making sure that they respond to things that are real as opposed to those that aren't? I know it's getting more sophisticated.
It is, and I kind of think about it like a baseball team. The pitcher is trying different pitches. They're seeing how they can catch the batter and strike out the batter. The threat actors are doing the same thing. They're trying different attacks. They're seeing which attacks are the most effective, and they're taking advantage of the lack of controls in organizations. And they might not win with the most sophisticated attack. They're just going to win with that curveball that most batters fall for. And along those lines, if your team is not out there at batting practice, practicing against all these curveballs on a regular basis, it is really unlikely that you're going to hit them and beat a professional threat actor team.
So if I'm in a company and I'm, let's say, in one of the finance functions and I've gone through my cyber training and I'm getting knocked on in Teams to, hey, you got to sign up for this week or make sure you send that. Is that kind of training keeping up with these kinds of threats? I'm a little concerned. I mean, in the baseball analogy, if we, just because I've been trained, does that mean I'm standing at batting cage at the batting practice with really an eye to the right kinds of pitches? That concerns me.
Yeah, what I think that the AI training can keep up. The problem is that the company culture around security awareness is not. And what I mean by that is if we enable the simulated AI attacks with a client, a huge percentage of their team fails. And that's because the simulated cyber attacks are using AI and they look really good. And the company culture is not progressing fast enough. The company culture is not learning how to spot sophisticated attacks. They're used to spotting the attacks from traditional cyber criminals asking to buy Target gift cards. And even then, a few percentage of the organization fail those on a monthly basis. It's much higher when it's AI generated.
Yeah, and I can appreciate the quality. We've all seen these things from, you name it, Grok and, ChatGPT and others about the video that can be prepared. Jeff, you've talked in the past about some examples where videos have gotten particularly harmful. Do you want to share a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, there was a recent example of a company based out of Hong Kong where they're called ARUP, ARUP. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but they recently had an incident where just what I was talking about, where they had a AI generate literally a online meeting with all the different participants, reached out to someone, contacted them, and generated this video content where someone on the video call asked them to send money to a specific bank account.
And bingo, it worked, didn't it?
And it worked. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
and it
this is
worked.
crazy. And
Yeah.
everybody says, wait, it looked like, John was on that call, but, maybe it wasn't John. So this is what
Yeah.
concerns me. I mean, it's kind of what triggered this podcast, which is, it's not like this is so far afield. It's all real and it's only going to get worse. So it
Yeah.
seems that Eric, you spend a lot of time in front of our clients. I mean, I imagine it's going to be a lot more training and examples kind of fed on a more weekly to monthly basis to people rather than the sign up for a cheap training session, which is what some people like to
Exactly.
do. Yeah.
Yeah, no, the training needs to be as sophisticated as the attacks that the threat actors are leveraging. We have to go to batting practice, and everybody has to take batting practice seriously.
All right, so we're going to move now to a little bit more of the defensive use of AI. We've touched on a little bit of better training and that sort of thing in our last section about the offensive capabilities that criminals and threat actors are doing. But how are security teams, guys? And I know Jeff, you're often a little more behind the scenes on some of that detail. But how are these teams, and our teams included, leveraging AI to detect threats faster, automate incident responses, and stay ahead of the attackers, which we know are just pounding on the on the open doors?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, security teams basically are using AI as a force multiplier and decision support system. So, what I mean by that is they're using AI to analyze massive data sets, all sorts of information that's coming from, these tools generate a lot of telemetry. When I say telemetry, I mean like logs and data points and things like that that have to be reviewed. Events have to be correlated and all that kind of stuff to identify a potential, a risk exposure. But analyzing those data sets has really been reduced significantly by the use of AI. It's also enhanced the ability to do behavioral detections. So identifying, in the old days, we used to say, hey, if someone logged in from, St. Paul, Minnesota, and then someone logs in from Taiwan within 5 minutes, that would be considered like a travel anomaly, right? But the challenge now is people are using like VPNs and things like that, where you can look like you're originating from anywhere at any moment. AI has helped to discern some of that, right? So it's really getting better at identifying real potential events that it could be a behavioral detection, right? Or a travel anomaly or something like that. The AI can also start to do automated triage and investigation. So you can leverage AI to say, execute X, Y, and Z and put this into place, add a firewall rule, disable an account, things like that. That's another thing that you can use AI to do. And really to get better actionable insights. Really, it helps to generate response plans and prioritize threats based on risk. So it's those are some of the key things that AI is really contributing to the picture. One thing I just want to step back just a little bit when we were talking about, the bigger picture, right? Today, the offense has the advantage because the offense, the threat actor, has operationalized AI the minute it came out. They started to do this. On the defense side, on the business side, things are much slower because it has to go through process changes and adoption by the organizations, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to see that we're a little slower on the uptake, but we'll talk about that a little bit more, I'm sure.
Okay. I have a couple takeaways. Then Eric, I'm sure you want to jump in. One is Jeff, I'm kind of summarizing. It sounds like AI is helping kind of reduce what we all as users don't like to see as a bit of a nuisance, that just every time I'm at my desktop, I don't want to have 16 different interruptions saying up security threat, what did you do, and is this authentic? So is it kind of culling through that to use behavior analysis or something I'm not trying to say I know, but I'm assuming that's what's going on because I don't seem to get nudged quite as often.
You're spot on. It's looking at 5 or 6 different key data points saying, you know what, this is something a human should look at.
Good. Well, I appreciate that because I think we all want to be as productive as we can without, being reminded too often that there's a security problem that isn't. So a little false positive goes away.
I just wanted to reiterate, if there's not a cyber team and the cyber team is not separate from IT and the cyber team is not practicing on a regular basis and looking at how they can better utilize AI the way that we're describing, then we're behind the ball. And like Jeff mentioned, the threat actors have the offense.
Hmm. So interesting. I feel like we're all sort of prey, and it's just a matter of time, no matter what. But I know that the defenses are really going to help. We'll get to that in a minute about future
Yep.
outlook. I do have another question or observation. Maybe you guys can comment. Is that you mentioned incident response, Jeff? It seems like, having seen situations where we are running a perfectly suitable cyber program with a client, things come up. We know that they need to be investigated. Can you talk a little bit about how that's actually saved both time and also mitigated risk? Is that that's a fair question.
Yeah. I mean, again, it really touches back on when I was talking about actionable insights. When you have to do a forensic analysis as part of an incident, it's great to have AI to help you extract all of the appropriate information and filter through it, right? Whenever we're doing a forensic investigation, as an example, just recently we had an account that was breached. The breached account was taken over by a threat actor where they were intercepting documents and then sending emails off to other people. And, we immediately have to go in and extract all this data from the source. Like in this case, it was Microsoft 365, right? So we were pulling all this information and trying to go through it as a human being could take hours and hours of time to find where the actual event happened, where it was triggered. By leveraging AI, we can really pull that information out and get to a point where something happened, and we can look at other logs and determine if there was any data exfiltrated, right? Data was actually shared, and who was also impacted, so that can be a part of the response plan, right? We know who to contact and reach out to and do it in a timely manner instead of taking a week and having people impacted by this respond, getting a response in a week saying, why did it take you a week to do this? We could do it in a day, right?
Right. And what's interesting is, it would be a pretty quick assumption to say, oh, well, with all this AI capability, then, we can just do this with some tools and plug them in and let them tell us what to do. I think we're pretty far from that at this point. To a fair statement.
Oh, absolutely. It's not a magic bullet, Bob. All of this stuff requires human review and an acceptance, right? It's never going to be, you don't do, if there was a threat, I would say that we have right now is an over reliance on AI and just accepting it as the gospel and not doing your due diligence.
All right, so we're gonna jump to a future outlook here, and this is kind of where we look to guys like Jeff and Eric to share from their experience, having been through far more than the last 5 or 10 years, but looking 5 or 10 years out. Do you believe that AI will give the advantage to the defenders or the attackers, and why? And I know, Jeff, you already said the offenders or the attackers, if you will, seem to have an edge right now. But what are you thinking about?
I would say that, in the next 5 to 10 years, in the short term, obviously, the attackers had the advantage. They were faster to adopt AI. They have lower barriers of entry, less operational friction. In the long term, though, as the organizations adopt AI, we're going to see that shift, and it's going to shift to the defenders. So they're going to be able to access the larger data sets. They're going to be able to get through that information. They're going to be able to scale on an enterprise level, and they're going to be able to mature their security programs. That's really what's going to happen in the long term. It's the short term that we have to sort of defend against right now. And I think, Eric, you had talked a little bit about, hey, the first barrier of entry is the human being, right? The one who receives the phishing email, and doing what we can to help them understand how to identify those things and how to respond to them is vital.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it comes down to people. And Eric, I've seen you in your training sessions where you've led people through this process, and I think it's just key to remember that cybersecurity really is behavioral in so many ways, in addition to the technical background. So I think there's a common theme here, and Jeff, kind of you touched on that about just making sure people are more prepared and more aware of what they need to be concerned about. Eric, what about you? What are you thinking about from a 5 to 10 year window? Anything to add from what Jeff said?
I think that some companies will become professional level baseball teams, and they will have the offense against these threat actor groups. Threat actors are obviously going to find new tactics and new curveballs, but some companies are going to have a great offense. I think there's a lot of companies that have a poor defense, and those companies that have a poor defense, after they get breached the first or second time, they'll think it'll never happen again, and it'll happen a third or fourth time.
I almost wonder if as a whole AI can, and I'm not painting a pie in the sky, but do you guys think that AI is really going to enable more people to have better cyber defense over the next 5 to 10 years just by default? In other words, it's, right now that we all know that there's so many holes out there that people just don't have the wherewithal or the interest in plugging. We see the people come to us sometimes after those haven't been plugged and they've been breached. So I look at this and think, maybe this gets everybody better in the long run. But to your point, Jeff, right now it's going to be a little harder for companies. Am I onto something?
Yeah, and I would emphasize that organizations that act now to start to adopt these tools and really enhance the defensive capabilities, and if they don't have them, find services that can provide them. Find people that can make them available to them and can act on their behalf. But the people who get ahead of this early are the ones who are going to close that gap sooner. And we've seen this. This is an age-old problem, right? We're always chasing the threat actor because the threat actor is always changing their tactics. And this is just one other example of that happening. In the long term, we get there. We get ahead of it, and we're able to do it by acting sooner and maturing your security operations. Is the key. That's the key thing to get there.
So we've kind of touched on, I think, our last point, which was going to be, hey, how would you guys recommend our, not necessarily our clients, because theoretically our clients are already prepared because we've already implemented some cyber programs with them. But, for people who aren't really quite there yet, we know cyber's a journey. Any additional commentary than what we've shared about how you suggest what might they do first and what should they be concerned about?
If senior leadership does not know how their cyber strategy is leveraging AI, then that is a huge red flag. Every senior leadership team, every information security steering committee should know how they're leveraging AI and whether or not they're leveraging AI appropriately in their security plan.
That's if they have a plan, to be fair. Right.
Right. And if you don't even have a plan, then you're definitely not leveraging AI.
Yeah, I think there's a mix of that out there. And we're not here to scare everybody, but at the end of the day, Eric, you're 100% right. This is a governance issue, right?
Totally.
Jeff, anything to add on the preparation side?
No, I mean, I just echo what Eric has to say. It takes leadership to drive a strategy, right? To adopt AI in the right way. So, I was talking earlier about, those who get there faster. You want to know how they get there faster? Have an engaged leadership team that understands this and recognizes the risk and can put forth a strategic initiative to drive this forward.
Yeah, it's got to be a priority, right?
We recorded the episode you've been listening to about a month ago. It is right now later April. And we expected that the AI cyber landscape would just continue to move quickly. And of course, it did. In the last couple of weeks, Anthropic made an unusual move. It did not broadly release its newest Claude Mythos preview, which is a model that they have created, and instead restricted access because of a variety of concerns which include how effective it is at identifying and in some cases exploiting software vulnerabilities. The tool was targeted to help cyber defense for many types of software and different types of entities. The concern, of course, is that Anthropic's own assessment describes Mythos as something that's quite capable, and when directed, it can find exploiting vulnerabilities across basically, from our understanding of the reports so far, every major operating system and also the web browsers that we all use, which is a different level of intensity level than we've seen before. And it is certainly different than the narrative around AI, which is that it'll help you code faster. Now we're talking about literally uncovering bugs and things that may not be A, good to do so quickly, and B, could cause tremendous amounts of risk in general. So adding to that concern, there have been some reports that Anthropic is now investigating some unauthorized access to this Mythos tool via third parties that are getting into it and also finding out what exploits have been made. So it's concerning. And as a result of this, we really wanted to have another conversation with both Jeff and Eric that you've been listening to in the prior elements of this podcast about really what's changed and why it matters for defenders, and how does it change the behavior of the attackers, especially given that other AI leaders are moving quickly as we go, and the Mythos class capability won't stay with Anthropic for long anyway. So Jeff, I'll throw this to you, since what is new and what's notable here, and why does it matter to cyber defenders right now?
Yeah, great questions. First, though, I think it's important to kind of understand, the event and how it really happened, and kind of what was involved, because this really speaks to some of the many of the things that we've talked about previously, right? At the end of the day, this event was a supply chain style security issue, not a direct breach of Anthropic, as you had mentioned, right? And really, so right now, Anthropic is investigating the access through a third-party vendor, and kind of what happened was the same thing as, really, this is a great example of a weak supply chain, right? Remember the big Target breach, right? So it was a third-party vendor who, was given access. They were trusted to be part of Project Glasswing, which is what this is really is the program that this small vetted group is being allowed to access Mythos, right? But it was some contractor that was able to get breached. The people that took advantage of that, of that account were able to get access to the platform and do some things with it. That's what it was. So it's not really a hack of Anthropic directly, but it's an example of a weakness in the supply chain, which is an age-old problem that we had. Now, Anthropic knew what they had. They knew what they had in their hands. They knew what this was capable of doing. And that is why they chose to restrict access to a tiny vetted group. And they positioned this as a security capability, not a general AI product. And, that's why they were trying to control this as a sensitive tool and not just a SaaS feature. At the end of the day, they recognized, so really what's new here is that AI has stepped away, as you said, from being a tool that's used to kind of help code, help, write better emails or whatever, right?
Right,
It's really now stepped into that framework of being something that can be potentially weaponized.
Interesting. So it's interesting. I think of, and maybe I'll paraphrase this, and you tell me if I'm wrong. You're basically saying, hey, up until now, these competitive tools and engines, whether it's OpenAI's ChatGPT or Anthropic's Claude or whatever, they're all providing a similar type of that have been used to do the things you're describing, and then some better, some worse, that kind of thing. But now you're saying that with the advent of Mythos, and whether there's some hype here about a potential public offering company and trying to throw things out about it, which always makes me skeptical because they want to go public later this year. But Anthropic kind of said we're gonna release something that's definitely more purpose built for something to do, almost like an application that is going to provide this kind of capability instead of the ability to just continue to be a better, faster version of what we've done. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely. So why this matters and what the real impact, though, is that, hey, look, we're looking at the attacker capability curve bending upwards, right? And we talked about this previously. We said, look, the people who are on the offense, right, the attackers, the cyber criminals, they're gonna leverage tools the minute they come out. They're gonna do whatever they can to take advantage of any resources that they have, and this just demonstrates that that's what's happening. And ultimately, this is going to expand to other AI models, because now the genie's out of the bottle, right? This is going to expand to other AI models, and we knew this was going to happen. We knew this was ultimately inevitable. The broader impact on this with this particular event or this particular tool set is that traditional model for identifying vulnerabilities, you identify the vulnerabilities. It would take months to discover them, and then you would incorporate it into a standardized patch cycle. But today, we have to bring in a new model. We have to identify those vulnerabilities quickly, leveraging the same AI capabilities, and be able to find ways to protect ourselves against them, right? Because that's what the cyber criminals doing. They're using the AI to identify the vulnerabilities fast, and they're weaponizing them.
Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on what the defense world can do, and really, what does this tell you about the near-term reality for patching and vulnerability management in general? And I'll follow that by saying, do you think the defenders can finally have a win here? Or are we always going to be looking at this, reactive catch up and try and outsmart the people who have seemingly unlimited resources and time?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think that the best thing that the defenders can do right now is to start to utilize the same kind of tools, right? And be able to identify things faster and react to them faster. And we, I know we had sort of that we had that dinner conversation about this, and we were talking a little bit about, AI is going to have to be incorporated into the antivirus stack, into the IDS or intrusion detection stack, right? So, and it might even be like an agent-based thing that you install on your systems. And again, the impact is broad. It's not just the operating system; it's the application stack as well. So it would have to be incorporated into the development process to identify these vulnerabilities that could be introduced through the type of code you're putting in place in the applications. What you expose to the internet directly through APIs or other types of connectivity. So again, it's really leveraging AI to do the same things, identify the vulnerabilities, close them out, and use AI to help you get there quickly. But the other strategies for defenders are really kind of the 101 stuff, right? You're not going to be able to patch everything right away. I mean, I wish you could say, one could commit to that, but it's really difficult to do. You might be able to get to a certain place with that in an automated capacity, leveraging AI. But again, it really boils down to the organization having a structured way to review their risk, identify critical items, and criticality is no longer based on just a standard CVSS score. That's how these vulnerabilities are ranked, and the score is 0 or 1 to 10, right? And 10s are like the most critical things. You're going to have to take into consideration, is this something that's exposed directly to the internet? How easy is it for it to be exploited? How quickly can it be exploited? Does it take multiple steps? Does it take a period of time? All those things have to be weighed, and you have to attack the things that are most critical versus the things that are less critical. So that's really strategically the way you got to do it, and attack what's most important, and then save the less important stuff later.
So essentially, taking already the application of cybersecurity as a discipline is already focused on risk management. And what you're suggesting is this is even fine tuning that further, which is, it sounds to me, that the defenders are going to have to, hey, you know what? At the end of the day, there's so much out there to hurt us. Let's figure out our biggest exposure and just really focus on those now, because we can't wait for the software tools to be so smart and get coded to do all of it for us.
Yes, Bob, you're spot on. The attackers are about to get a lot better. They're about to get a lot stronger and get a lot more wins. And that's a huge problem, because the attackers are already pretty good. They're already getting way too many wins. They're already running $1 trillion criminal enterprise. It's the largest organized criminal threat in history. And they're about to get better. And that should be concerning.
Yeah. Agreed. And, we could all get into the nation state actor issues and all the threat actors that are out there. It's pretty scary. That's why, I'm trying to think about, for all the clients that, and certainly the business community that we all get in touch with every day, I think the concept here is just really prudent risk management is what I'm hearing right now. And obviously be able to deploy the latest developments from any number of tools. And some things are probably, you guys tell me, I think things are going to start cropping up that weren't from the major publishers of security software in the past. They're going to be able to do really point solutions, right, to this kind of thing.
Exactly. Ad hoc risk management is not going to work anymore. Companies and especially small businesses have kind of been getting away with it. They've been getting lucky, but that's not going to work in the future.
Yeah. It sounds like you need a general the prudence of a general cybersecurity defense program, but also which obviously not everybody has, which is part of why we do what we do. But we want to help people build those, obviously. But the reality is that there's going to be another layer now of more targeted defensive, configurations around certain things that are even the most critical. I don't know. That's what I'm sensing.
Yes, I would agree.
One other thing I would point out, though, is that more than ever, vendor ecosystems are now part of that attack surface, right? As I talked about, this whole event with Anthropic was because of a third party vendor or a partner, right, that had access to the tools. And it's even more important than ever to really follow the basics. Always come back down to the basics, because that's gonna be your biggest threat protection. I mean, we talk about people clicking on an email, educating people not to click on a link in an email that they don't recognize, or having the tools to identify those things as suspicious. The same thing is going to happen. It's really vendor management, making sure they follow the same security practices that you are following yourself, right, as an organization, and holding them accountable. One of the things analogies I like to use is that security is in layers, right? And I like to call those layers slices of Swiss cheese. Every layer has a hole in it. But if you can stack those things in a way, stack after layer after layer after layer, those holes start to shrink and minimize, right? And that's really vendor management's one of those pieces. The tools that you use, adopting AI to be a preventative measure is another one of those layers, right? Managing risk and prioritizing how you're going to fix issues is another layer, right? We just keep layering those things on, and that's how we get to a more secure place.
Yeah, no, it's becoming a bit more of a combination of art and science here. Sounds like to me. I'd like to move into the offensive side for a minute. Even if something like Mythos is restricted, the existence of things like it, as well as its competitors, right? Again, they're going to be released at some point. You suggest that the whole world is moving towards this shortening of the timeline I mentioned earlier between a vulnerability being discovered and coming up with the way to hack it, right? Is that going to, I think it's obvious, but that's going to change the way threat actor organizations, and Eric, you alluded to the broader industry of being on the bad side, if you will.
Yes.
How do you think is that going to change? Because I assume they're just going to go turbo speed, but that's my speak. How do you sense it'll change what they do and how they focus?
So they're gonna what they're really gonna do is they're leveraging these tools not only to reduce the amount of time, right, it takes them to identify vulnerabilities, but they're seeing vulnerabilities that weren't previously identified through standard processes. And I think I'm trying to recall the specifics, but I'm thinking about there was a bunch of vulnerabilities identified for Mozilla, right? Where
Firefox.
they were able to identify like all these vulnerabilities that they hadn't even suspected were there, right? So this is a curse and a blessing, right? So first of all, now we can leverage similar tools to identify those same vulnerabilities. But what the threat actors are going to do is they're finding more stuff to attack. So the volume is increasing. They are able to do it faster. It takes them less time to be able to try to hit those things and take advantage of them. And again, they're banking on the fact that people that other organizations aren't patching these things quickly enough, and I know they're not, from my experience.
Right.
It's so hard for people to keep on top of simple things, just like web browsers, like patching Firefox. And I constantly see Firefox showing up with vulnerabilities that are critical, and all it takes is a reboot of the firewall, or not the firewall, but of the web browser to get those patches installed.
So is it a fair statement to say that we, and again, this kind of goes to a point I was going to use in closing today, but I think it's just a natural flow here, right? Which is, if we're mid-market companies out there, we're not with the budgets of the Boeings and the Ford Motor Company, General Motors, whoever, and we're trying to deal with how do we defend ourselves? And we already alluded to the general program called a cyber defense program, which we know, and the targeted look at your assets and make sure you really know what you need to protect and take measures for them with whatever tools are then available. What I'm hearing you say is there are going to be capabilities, and I'm assuming this is the case, that are going to be built into the existing defensive tool sets that are on the market today that are going to be mostly affecting, at least first and foremost, things that everybody uses, Edge and Chrome and Windows, 11 and Mac, OS. I mean, I assume that's where it starts. Is that correct, or am I off?
No, I mean you're right on. And it's again, I think Eric would echo on this one. It's one of the things we try to drive clients towards is adopting standardization, right? If you allow your organization to use one or two web browsers, you can ensure that those web browsers are properly hardened and that they're getting updated. But if it's sort of the free range where anyone can pick whatever they want to use, that's going to be more challenging, right? But at the end of the day, if I were to kind of distill this into a single sentence, what I would say is the battle isn't about finding vulnerabilities anymore. It's really about fixing the right ones fast enough to matter. So it's in the short term, we're going to have a huge backlog. We just have to continue to get clear the things that we can clear out that are the most important and the most critical to protect ourselves. Because at the end of the day, that's what threat actors are going to go after anyway. They're still looking for the easiest way through the door.
I'm wondering, I mean, Eric, I can just picture us in conversations. I mean, we're going to need to address this. And I guess, do you sense the changes in the control frameworks out there that are designed for controls to be implemented for prudent security? Do you sense that those are going to be modified fairly quickly with this? And it's just going to be a matter of, this is just what's going on in the world, so we got to adapt.
100%. I think a lot of the business community will react. That's what they've traditionally done. They'll be reactive. It'll get a lot worse before it gets any better. And the companies that have a higher impact will respond first, and they'll mature quicker than the companies that have a lower impact.
Yeah, it's for sure. And I just feel like it's almost like, even more than ever, if I'm a C-level executive and I know that we probably haven't invested in cyber in a mature way, but more of a throw money at the IT group way, which is super common.
Some small business executives and IT personnel will blame AI, but it's really not an AI problem. It's the fact that the organization's cybersecurity maturity level is too low, and it's not capable of responding to new threats. That's the real problem.
Yep. And I think, maybe I'll certainly end there. I do want to say that the only part of this that's really intended to be a bit of a promotion might be what I'm about to say, which is we can help do this, right? So we help our clients through starting wherever they are, meeting them where they are in terms of their cyber journey, and getting them over to the next level as best as they can and within the budget they have. So, exactly. There's no ironclad. We know that.
I would just say that, look, we're going to get through this. We've gone through this hundreds of times with security. Cybersecurity is always changing. The threat landscape's always changing. This is just a new challenge. We're going to be able to get through this stuff. There's going to be tools and ways to do it. Just be open to adopting those tools and adopting the secure practices that your organization should really be implementing, and you're going to be less likely to be compromised.
Yep, got to be smart about what you're trying to protect and get it done.
Yep.
Eric, anything to add, or are we good?
No, I think we're great. Great conversation, Bob and Jeff.
Awesome. Right. Thank you, gentlemen. And again, thank you to the listeners who have now listened to part 2, which we had a feeling might have to happen, right? And my goodness, I'm sure we'll have part 3 if something else develops soon. So thanks, guys. Have a great day. And thank you to our listeners. Have a great day. Thank you for tuning into the Singer Lewack Balancing Act podcast series. We really appreciate it, and look forward to speaking with you again. And our information's in show notes if you'd like it, if you want to reach out. So have a great day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Balancing Act podcast. As AI accelerates change in cybersecurity, strong governance and informed leadership matter more than ever. Join us for our next episode, where we will turn the focus to AI and data. And if you found this conversation valuable, be sure to share this episode with someone you think can benefit from it. Thanks for tuning in.